This is Shadowland, a new podcast experience from this Jungian life that explores the lives of people who take refuge in the hidden places of our culture. Lisa, Deb, and Joseph collaborate with songwriter Wells Hanley, creator of I Wrote This Song For You podcast, to bring insight, compassion, and understanding to the obscured side of human experience. The 13th century mystic Rumi wrote, "Longing is the core of mystery. Longing itself brings the cure." In that spirit, we meet Beth, who was assigned female at birth and underwent gender transition, including masculinizing hormone therapy and top surgery. She has since detransitioned. As a teen, she adopted a non-binary identity and over time came to believe that transitioning to male would free her from the social constraints and physical vulnerabilities she associated with her female body. Over time, Beth discovered changing her body did not resolve her inner suffering. Acknowledging that each person has their own unique journey, she hopes her story will help others appreciate the depth and complexity of gender transition. To protect her identity, she has asked us to alter her voice and use the pseudonym Beth. Wells's song will be shared at the end of our discussion.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Yes, welcome.
So, Beth, one question that I have is, can you describe for us how you began to realize or hypothesize that your sense of sex and gender was different from the other women in your sphere of social influence?
That's an interesting question, because for me, I was in a sphere that actually involved a lot of people identifying as transgender or non-binary, different kinds of gender identities not related to their biological sex. So when I began to question my gender in my teens, it was sort of a process of seeing, feeling like I wasn't like other women who I considered like cisgender and like gender conforming, but also seeing kind of a lot of the female people who were maybe more sexually fluid or perhaps just like non-conforming in different ways, like maybe more of tomboys, more like interested in masculine stuff. Those sorts of people, as I began to kind of grow up and go through college, were often identifying as non-binary or transgender. So it was sort of like something that I saw unfolding in a lot of my friends. And then I also felt drawn to a cross-sex identification, and like I felt that I also was not a standard woman. I saw myself in the kind of people who were transgender, if that makes sense.
In what ways did you feel identifying as female was somehow inherently limiting, or something about that was you resisted?
I think I was sort of engaged in like a very feminist framework in life from a really young age, including like from my mom was a very huge feminist, still is. But I think I was always thinking about the oppressions that women faced and the limitations that women faced, and sort of constantly ruminating on how limited the female gender role is, and like the patriarchy and all these sorts of like feminist frameworks and like obsessing over them and becoming it started to really shape my worldview. Like I was always really afraid of being raped. And I always had this sense of like being really limited and unsafe in a way that I felt that a male person would not be.
And was that perception based on any objective experiences, Beth?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was based on objective experiences, but I also like fed into it. So I know I had an uncomfortable relationship with my body since puberty. I was a real androgynous, like ugly duckling before I went through puberty. And then I kind of got these boobs and sort of became like shaped like a woman, but like didn't, but it was very jarring for me. And I was always very socially awkward and strange. So always had this strange feeling of being kind of this like sex object, but I wasn't comfortable inhabiting that role at all. I was like a late bloomer emotionally in that way. And I've had experiences of sexual objectification, and I actually even courted that as a young person by doing some like internet like cam girl type stuff. I don't know if you guys know what that is.
No, what is it?
It's kind of like light prostitution on the internet. I don't know why I did this, but I think it had something to do with the kind of feminist analysis I was absorbing as a teenager. I thought that it was considered very empowering to like to exhibit your body for money. That was like a way to inhabit a powerful feminine gender role. So I did that as soon as I was legally allowed to.
Wow.
And so that was a really stark. I think that only increased my discombobulation with feeling like my body was this really like sexual thing that I then divided my mind from, and I kind of felt like it wasn't me. I guess.
You know, you said a minute ago that you were sort of a late bloomer in terms of being able to kind of inhabit this role of kind of like a sex object. But I wanted to say, I mean, I have a teen daughter, and, you know, there is a way that when you're 17 or 18, you have a very most young women have a very womanly body. But thank God that they're not all comfortable inhabiting the sort of role of a sex object, right? Like that, I don't know that that's healthy or developmentally appropriate. It's just that sometimes I think young women get thrust into that role by the culture, and that is distressing, if I'm hearing what you're saying.
Yeah, it's strange. I think it's strange to think about how uncomfortable that inhabiting that kind of role made me, but also how I like felt. I just sort of like went for it despite my discomfort, and I think I went too far with it.
I want to say that kind of leaning into that situation, it's a little bit like what in psychology is sometimes referred to as identification with the aggressor. You know, it's like if you're in a situation where you've been disempowered, sometimes a way to take the power back is to sort of step into that role purposefully yourself, so that at least if it's happening to you, at least it's happening to you because you chose it.
I'm interested in understanding better how your disidentification with the traditional feminine roles got connected with your body, rather than I'm just not going to do those things. I'm not going to be that way. I'm going to have the life I want to have. But somehow it got located in your body where that in some way was part of the problem and needed to be changed. Especially since you said your mother is a feminist, which, you know, seems to me inherently to be a message of go ahead, be a woman and be empowered.
Mm. Well, my mother is a feminist, but she also, I think, is like a functional anorexic. I'm not totally
Hmm.
confident in this, but I have struggled with. I think that you can have that kind of, you can like hear those kinds of feminist messages, but when you actually see female figures in your life sort of having this demonic struggle with like food and with weight and stuff, it I think that's kind of the thing that penetrates more deeply. And I flirted with a lot of restricting food and stuff, and obsessed over my weight and obsessed over trying to be thin for a really long time before I started trans identification. And then when I started considering transition, I actually thought of it as a solution to my persistent like eating and body anxieties, because a lot of trans men on the internet talk about it solving those issues for them. So I was like, oh, I kind of made the connection. I was like, oh, I've always like, wanted to starve down to like be really thin and stuff. But it was actually because I was trying to manifest this androgynous male form. It like kind of made sense to me at the time. I was like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. So
Well, and there is overlap significant between uh, teens, teen FTMs, and eating disorders, and there's some research about that. And it does seem to me that both of them can stem from a desire to kind of escape that sexualized female body.
yeah.
Talking about that process of discovering one's sexual potency and power, I was thinking back to a stage that my stepdaughter went through when she was about 16 to 18 years old. She would go out shopping and come home with wildly, we thought, inappropriate clothing. I mean, extraordinarily sexually provocative clothing. So all of us parents got together and talked about it, and we decided that we would not say anything, but just keep an eye on her safety. One time she showed up at her little brother's baseball game and walked across the lawn to the edge of the field to cheer him on, wearing 8-inch stilettos, a tube top, and lacy leggings, waving and cheering with her hands in the air, and I'm in the bleachers worrying about her. But talking with her afterwards, she was remarkably aware that she was exploring the power of her sexuality. She was consciously experimenting with her appearance and felt empowered by the enormous amount of attention and influence she wielded with these young men. Luckily, she did not wind up in situations that were unsafe. It took her a while to own her power and decide that she was going to shape it in a way that looked very different as she moved into college and then the professional world. So I think there is a self-initiation drive for some young women to discover that being beautiful and sexual offers a kind of power.
I think I just want to step in for a second. And Beth, I'd love to hear your take on what Joseph just said. Joseph, I agree with you. Of course, that there's a way that beauty and sexuality is a form of power, and that can be very positive. It doesn't need to be a bad thing. I do think that unlike when your stepdaughter was 16 to 18, nowadays we've got the internet, we've got social media, and we've got porn everywhere. And it feels, there's something that feels darker about it for a lot of the teen girls who are coming up now, that the way they inhabit their beauty or their sexuality is so framed by how you're supposed to appear on social media and how many likes you get and how many followers you have, and the expectations that are put upon these, basically these teens. They're not adults yet because of porn. I mean, one little snapshot statistic is that the number of teenagers seeking cosmetic surgery on their labia has shot up recently because everyone wants their labia to look like it does in the porn videos. So I just think we need to say, like, something different has been happening in the culture recently.
And yet I'm cautious to generalize. I think there's an archetypal component, and for my stepdaughter, she clearly was a daughter of Aphrodite.
See,
And
I'm not
for
I'm not
her,
denying that. I'm
yeah.
not denying that. I'm just saying there's this other cultural thing that has shifted the ability to do that in a relatively unconstrained way.
For some people, what I'd like to do is to create some breathing room, that there's a wide range of phenomena, and that no young woman is captured by any one frame, and that there is breathing room in
I
this.
don't disagree with that. I'm just
Yeah.
trying to signal this
Yeah,
other thing.
yeah.
So anyway, Beth, I'm curious what if you have a take on this argument that Joseph and I are in. What was your experience of kind of feeling that sense of power that comes with recognizing your attraction, your attractiveness?
Yeah, I see my younger self really strongly in things that both of you said. And Joseph is right. It really is like powerful. You inhabit this amazing power as like an attractive young woman in this really like primal way that honestly like shocked me and intoxicated me. And I was, but it was confusing because I felt like I sort of had this self concept as like an androgynous sort of sexless being. And then I was enjoying my body in some ways and feeling powerful in my body, but also it felt sort of out of control, especially once I started experimenting with like engaging sexually with people on the internet and sort of opening myself up at a really young age to the world of like porn and like just a humongous torrent of like anonymous men's sexual fantasies and sexual projections on me. Like that sort of thing was became disturbing and like too much for me to, I think, handle, I guess. It is really powerful and it felt good, but it also felt it was confusing and like not a power that I felt comfortable inhabiting, I guess.
It must have been overwhelming to get that much attention. I think when young people put their intimate selves forward on the internet, they can be targeted by thousands of messages that push others' fantasies into them. That can have a stunning effect.
Yeah, the weight of those projections.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tremendous amount of power, just in terms of, if I were to make it analogous to electricity, of what we can get on the internet as these huge surges from so many people. It's so intense that it makes me feel really kind of sad that young people are somehow exposed to it or expected in some way to endure it or to be equal to it, and it's too much. I'm wondering if there was anyone or how you were able to share your experience with anyone. Did anybody help you put into words what was going on inside so that you could understand it a little better?
Do you mean related to transgender identification or the earlier like grappling with female?
Any and all of it, whatever comes up for you around that. But I'm just thinking about how all of us, but especially teens and perhaps especially in today's world, probably need some help, some companioning, just people to talk to about this is what's going on inside.
Or perhaps even a confidant around all of these explorations.
Yeah, I've had a few close female friends that I think were also I had a few close female friends and still do who were engaging with their like sexuality and their identities and wrestling with it in the same sorts of contexts that I was. None of my best friends went from a hypersexual young woman to a trans man like I did, but everyone was kind of doing their own. I guess my best friends were always like doing their own things and like exploring their sexuality in ways that also felt like dangerous, but also electrifying and like powerful. Like I know I had, I had friends who were seeing adult men when they were like younger teenagers, pretty like, kind of scary, but also like I think felt powerful. And friends who were experimenting with like going to BDSM clubs and stuff, just like all kinds of interesting.
Mhm.
Everyone was doing weird, interesting stuff. And I think we all kind of affirmed each other, but also looking back on it from a little bit of an older age, it feels like all of us were sort of playing with fire in different ways that is probably natural at that age. Can be a little harrowing to look back on, I guess.
Yeah.
So where were the grown-ups?
Where are the grown-ups?
Yeah, where were they? When your kids are playing with fire, hopefully some grown-up comes along and says, hey guys, you got to stop. What's going on?
Know. I think we all keep it secret.
I think it's really, one thing that young people do is they seek ways to initiate. And if the culture doesn't provide ways, youth will find ways to self-initiate. The thing about initiations is there's always something dark and dangerous about them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be initiatory. But with an initiation, ideally, you've got elders helping you across.
Yes.
But these self-initiations, things can go kind of awry because as Deb pointed out, there are no elders.
Yes, and so the rituals of self-initiation can be looked at discriminatingly. But what I want to validate, Beth, is that the impulse to want to gestate your sexuality in secret is the most normal thing. It's so private. The mysteries that are changing in one's body are so private and so secret, as well as exploring cultural shadow, whether that's BDSM or different sexual experiments. I think that this is part of discovering oneself and discovering oneself without the judging eyes of the culture and the judging eyes of the parents that want to enforce their system of beliefs on the children. And yet, as we're saying, that comes with some risk. But I understand it. I'd like to circle back to something we touched on but didn't have a chance to unpack a bit. You'd mentioned your mother and your perception of her as a functional anorexic in her own demonic struggles. Her outer personality, she was a feminist and seemed to be a champion of women in her rhetoric, and yet there was an internal conflict. There is a powerful idea that Jung had that parents will unconsciously pressure children to live out their unlived life. And because it happens unconsciously, often it's not as aesthetic or as civilized as it might look if it were understood. So, just from that theoretical lens, as you're holding that image of your mother and you're watching an internal pressure for you to transform your body and your own sex identity, is there a sense that you were making manifest something that the mother was holding as a shadow, that you were symbolically bringing something forward that she was gestating?
I think that the thing that seems to come from my mom that I touched on a lot in my transition was this idea that I could be, I guess, free. I could like be free and wild and unworried about my body and about food and calories and fat and all this stuff. It's strange, but I had this idea that I would maybe be like a little bit of a chubby trans guy and it would be okay. And I would be like lovable and could be messy and just kind of relax in a way that I didn't see my mom doing, I guess. And I wished I could take her with me, I guess, to that place. It's kind of strange. I almost like want like I don't think I wanted her to transition, but I wanted her to I wanted to kind of like rescue us from the struggle with food, I guess.
You were kind of looking for a place where there was permission to not worry about your body.
Mm-hmm.
And you wanted that for yourself and your mom.
And yet coming to this idea of the animus, that the inner masculine often is configured oppositely to the outer personality of a woman. So for your mother to feel that she has to be a woman who is rail thin, that she would then have an inner man who is chubby, to feel that she has to hyper-regulate everything in her outer world, and then have an inner man who's really messy and regulates very little. There's this wonderful alchemy of opposites that is alive. If the mother had been able to embrace that internal image, she might have had permission to become that chubby, messy fellow inside of herself, at least on occasion, or at least symbolically feel that. But when that chubby, messy, wild, libidinous fellow in her, which, by the way, is exactly how Dionysus, the god of ecstasy, is described, as a chubby, wild, messy, sometimes drunken being who, by the way, cross-dressed in the ancient culture. That Dionysus, as a young god, was initiated into the feminine mysteries by his grandmother Rhea, and having gone through the Eleusinian mysteries, came out wearing a fawn skin, and fawn skin were only worn by women in the ancient world. So in the depictions of Dionysus, who's often a chubby, happy young man, he's dressed in women's clothing. So, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So just kind of moving to the timeline here, Beth, when did you see, first you identified as non-binary, and can you tell us about deciding on that or coming out, or what your process was in selecting that, and just kind of that part of the story?
So I found non-binary identity when I was in my early time in college, and a lot of my friends were non-binary. So that means they didn't identify as the opposite sex. They sort of identified as beyond gender, and like they used pronoun. They had people call them they, them instead of he, she, or yeah. So I had a feeling, though, when I started identifying as non-binary, it was because I had this sort of, I started thinking about the concept of myself as being free of a gender identity, or like being different than the female role somehow. And it gave me this like little euphoric rush of freedom. It like felt almost like a little bit of a religious epiphany or something. I was like, oh, like maybe that's me. Like maybe I'm non-binary. Like, and I was like, oh, that feels so good to think I'm like free and special in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And then my friends were very affirming of it, and my parents were very affirming of it, and everyone was like, oh, that's wonderful. And I think even my mom was like, yeah, I always thought you might be like not just she's my mom was like, I always thought you might be non-binary or trans in some way, like beyond just female. So I had a lot of affirmation.
That must have felt really good to have everyone be so affirming.
yeah, it felt it was like this little thing all about me, and it was nice.
Did you make any changes to your presentation?
Funnily enough, not really at the time. I think the only expression of my non-binary identity was that I had short hair at the time. So I kind of stayed in that state for a while. But after a few years, I began to realize, well, I might feel non-binary, but everyone just sees me as a woman, which makes some sense because I am female and didn't really change my body. But after a while, I was like, I'm not sure that my identity is really showing through in what I look like. So after a while, it felt like that wasn't enough.
Beth, I feel like we're beginning to move into territory that's very interesting. Jung prioritized the imaginal world, a vibrant inner landscape we inhabit in our dreams where extraordinary images and dramas unfold. And of course, we're often at the center of those dramas. It's not uncommon for inner images to change form. These changes often carry a kind of tension that fights to concretize, though Jung often suggested it's best if they stay in a more spiritual, rarefied, psychological form. When you were talking about your mother and her impact, and shared the image of yourself as a messy, chubby, happy, and wild trans man, I realized that you were also describing a beautiful image of Dionysus. I'm curious about the pressure this image carried to manifest itself and the extraordinary lengths it could take to make that happen. I'm wondering about your particular process to incarnate your new image.
Well, I think that I sort of decided to transition. There was one moment that really, I think, changed everything for me, which was that I have dated men and women in my life. So I had a date with this person who was a female non-binary person who reminded me a lot of myself, and was very, attractive and appealing. And they told me that they were not currently on any hormones or had gotten any surgeries, but they told me that they were intending to have top surgery, which is a double mastectomy, and go on testosterone. And when I heard this from this person I was dating, I was like, oh, like, I never thought of myself as being sort of eligible for this kind of transformation, but I see now that like someone who's just like me can do this. And I thought that was so exciting. And I felt again another like sort of like, like, oh, like maybe this is my path. Like this person, I see myself in this like androgynous, sweet female person. And I thought, it got me thinking that like maybe I could transform myself in this way.
Mm-hmm.
And was that when you began thinking of yourself as a trans man instead of non-binary?
I don't think that was the moment. When I really decided to go forward with my transition was maybe 6 months later, after I had become very depressed and had started having suicidal thoughts of, I started having, I was very aimless at the time. I started having this suicidal ideation. I kept thinking about throwing myself into bodies of water and drowning all the time. Mm-hmm. So I got very depressed.
How come? How come you got depressed?
I think I was just kind of aimless at the time. I had recently graduated from college and I just didn't know what to do at all. I had never been out of a structure before. I'd just always been in school, and now I hadn't planned anything for my life at all, really.
That's a scary, scary transition.
Yeah, I really hadn't set myself up very well. I was sort of just floundering. And I had this dark feeling like maybe I wanted to kill myself. And then I started thinking about what I might need to do to make my life livable. And I had this image. I thought maybe my suicidal desires meant that like the woman in me had to go, and I had to like start to be reborn as a man, maybe.
That makes sense. I find myself thinking about alchemy right now, about water and the solutio. As the ancient alchemists were experimenting, they would discover that certain fluids could dissolve metals, which helped them isolate certain substances, but also could create new amalgams. Jung thought about this psychologically and noted that his analysans often dreamt of being cast into bodies of water as if they could dissolve in an ocean, be reconfigured, and emerge transformed. There's something ancient, archetypal, and wise in your desire to dissolve and be reconfigured as someone who was happy, as someone who felt content and in integrity with themselves.
So symbolically, a part of you did need to die, but it wasn't your femaleness.
Yeah, it wasn't. I think I was struggling. A lot of things I associated with my femaleness, I feel like I blamed for. It was like a lot of the traits that I saw as like female traits felt like some of the traits of myself that had brought me to that point, I guess. Like sort of I felt like I had kind of concentrated too much on just like boyfriends, and I don't know, just sort of being this like airhead, and not been like not had that drive to like shape my life before. So I was struggling with that part of myself. But it's interesting though, because the femaleness, I came to see that like femaleness for me is like it's non-negotiable, because it's my body is female, like all of my body is female. And through my transition, whatever happened, my body was still female, which sounds obvious, but I think I was in sort of a haze where I really felt like I was going to be transformed in some really profound physical way that just didn't happen.
You know, I can feel the dilemma and the desire for transformation and to access psychologically and emotionally some other part of you that seemed imaged by maleness. So, what happened next? Where did you go, and how did you pursue the next stage of this journey?
So I went to a therapist who wrote me a letter to say that I was transgender, and had felt that way for 2 years, which was sort of true. And then I went to a doctor who gave me some testosterone. And there was this wonderful trans man nurse there who, when I first got my first testosterone shot, he showed me how to do it. And he was just like the image of what I hoped I would become. He was like this like handsome, sort of grizzled, like cheerful, chubby guy. And he gave me a testosterone shot, and he said like, today you are a man. Like it was so, I was so touched. It was very beautiful. And on that day I felt so excited. It was it was a really exciting and beautiful time when I first started testosterone. And it gave me, when I was first on it, it made me feel, it was incredible at first. It was like I started having hair growing on my body. It was like strange and delightful. It was really weird, and my body was changing, and my voice was getting deeper, and I really felt like I was transforming in this magical way.
Did you find that you had more energy? Right. I was about to say.
Yeah, the testosterone, it made me, it gave me all this sexual libido that I'd never had before. I always had this really like anxious sexuality, and then I had this like charge of like intense sexual straightforward energy from the testosterone. So it was a trip.
Mm-hmm. That part does sound very initiatory, of the trans male nurse who welcomes you across the threshold of today you are a male. And I'm appreciating the sexual libido, the biological effect of the testosterone shot, and that it must have, I'm assuming, really helped with the depression.
It did. I felt a lot more energized, and I also felt like I had this way forward. I like saw my way forward. I was like, I'm going to be on this testosterone. I'm going to start passing as a man, and that's going to feel amazing. And I'm going to get surgery, and that's going to feel amazing.
So you went from being aimless to having this goal that had a very clear path.
Yeah.
And whenever I felt the sort of suicidal urge to like throw myself in the water, I would like remind myself that I was like transforming and like I was on my journey. And I was in sort of a trance. I think I remember writing in my diary a lot, being like I'm going through I was like writing about the kind of man I was going to become, and sort of like, I don't know. It felt very ecstatic and obsessive.
Can I just ask, I want to just go back before we move forward too much. What was your therapy process like to get that letter?
I don't know. My therapist I think she didn't know that much about trans stuff, potentially. I just sort of came to her and was like, hey, I'm looking for a therapist to sort of write this letter for me and, maybe talk to me a little bit about this. And she wasn't very familiar with a lot of the like current trans issues and stuff. So, but I just told her that I was feeling suicidal and that I wanted to transition and that I needed this letter. And I think she wrote it for me after maybe 3 sessions or something. Or maybe 2. I don't know. I didn't do too much therapy, to be honest.
So you were left to negotiate with archetypal forces all by yourself. I have the feeling you are a daughter of Dionysus, the god of dismembering and remembering, the ecstatic god who transcends gender norms. 2 children of Dionysus feel relevant. Methe is the goddess of drunken trances, and when you talk about feeling intoxicated by the idea of transforming into a man, it strikes me as a visitation by Methe. Priapus is another son of Dionysus, the god of phalluses or erect penises. That was his unique realm. My analysans who are trans men often identify with aspects of Priapus. They experience his image as particularly transcendent.
Yeah, I think I experienced that sort of, what you call it, like an incarnation of like a phallic energy. I felt that, not to get too, I guess, intimate, but I definitely felt that, I guess, like phallus type sexual energy.
Yes.
That was one of my triggers as well of like wanting to transition, is like feeling sort of like I was missing a penis or like a phallus.
Yeah.
I guess.
And that it is a spiritual initiation. This is a spiritual dynamic that is happening in the soul legitimately and is legitimate at the level of soul.
And phallic energy is the opposite of this kind of aimlessness and lack of direction. There's desire, there's direction, and literalizing it a little bit, a desire to thrust yourself into life and into the world. So I'm curious, Beth, about what happened next that led you into surgical intervention.
So after the initial rush of testosterone, the gender sort of dysphoria got worse because I had my body was changing. I was sort of becoming this more androgynous person, but I was also still very like clearly female, and I was feeling really weird and disjointed. I still had breasts, and I still had, looked female, but I had this hair and this deep voice and this identity that was incongruous. So I rushed as fast as I could to get top surgery, which is removal of the breasts, because I kind of thought that after that, before that, I was doing binding, which is where you take a very tight vest basically and squish your breasts down to try to pass as male, and that was really restrictive. It means you can't breathe very well. It really is uncomfortable, and I just wanted to get past the phase of binding as quickly as possible. So I went and I got surgery, maybe pretty quickly.
Can I ask, did you have to also get a letter for that?
Yeah, I got a letter from my therapist and also from my my doctor who had been giving me hormones. They both gave letters that I had been transgender.
And again, did you have a long therapy process to get the letter for the mastectomy?
No, I actually just emailed. I had stopped going to therapy at that point, and I just emailed my therapist and said, "Hey, can you please write me my top surgery letter?" And I gave her the format of what the letter should say that I looked up on the internet, and she just copied it and filled in my name. So, and my doctor did the same.
And tell me about the surgeon who did this. Was this someone who specialized in this, or how did you find this person, or what was that like?
Oh, I had a really uncomfortable experience with my feelings about the surgeon, because the surgeon was this woman who specialized in transgender surgery, and she's this really beautiful feminine woman. And when I was talking to her, she was so confident and so, obviously she's a surgeon. She's this really brilliant, high achieving woman. And she was dressed into this feminine, beautiful outfit. And when I was talking to her, I had the beginnings of a flash of regret. I was like, man, this is I know that what it's like to inhabit this, the role of a feminine woman, and it's so much easier, and it's so much, people respond better to that, and it's honestly so much more socially powerful. And I felt this flash of real jealousy at her, that she got to be this beautiful surgeon and I was this trans man. But I squished it down because I was like, no. I'm on this path. This is the kind of person she is, and I'm the kind of person that I am, and this is my destiny. So, you have to leave that behind and leave the feminine behind. So that was interesting.
Did you talk to different surgeons, or you just knew you were going to work with her?
I just went to her. I just went to this woman because it was the first woman who I found, and she took my insurance. So, so I just went ahead with it. And
what was the surgery like itself?
Well, it was another kind of special day. My my parents took me to stay in a hotel outside of the hospital so that I could recover there the night after the surgery. And we were there the night before as well. And I'm gonna try not to get too emotional here, but it was a strange night. The night before the surgery, I had horrible nightmares all night. And then I had to wake up at 6 and go in for surgery. And sorry, it's a little tender, I guess.
It's okay, Beth. Take your time.
Yeah, I went in really early in the morning. And I don't know. They wheeled me in, and I felt a little bit like I was in a trance. Right before I went under, I had like one urge to just roll off the gurney and run away, which was strange. But of course, I didn't do that. So, and then I woke up and I was completely doped up on a bunch of painkillers, and my breasts were gone, and I was wrapped up in ace bandages, and I had strange, you know, like fluids and tape and things leaking. And I had this really swollen, strange thing on my chest where my breasts used to be. And it was a very strange time. At first I had expected it to be this really amazing experience. And funnily enough, because I was on so much like Vicodin and stuff and like anesthetic in the area, it actually did feel like physically euphoric at first. It was strange because my chest looked horrible. It was really strange, and my nipples were crooked. It was like maybe not a very good surgery, but the feeling itself was like amazing. And I was like, this is it. Like, I made it. Woo! But then the drugs wore off, and it felt like nothing I'd ever felt before. It was like, I don't know. It's strange. The feeling of having part of your body cut off is not a feeling that I think you can understand unless you've had a part of your body cut off, I suppose. It was like, it felt like, oh, like, this is something I've never felt before. And I had this feeling of like, oh, like, what have I done to myself?
How soon after did you have that feeling? Like, was it literally just when the drugs were off, or was it a week later, or?
Pretty much as soon as like a day later when the local anesthetic wore off, I started to have the beginnings of a real feeling of dread. Like maybe I'd made a really bad mistake.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and then what happened?
Well, I kept taking testosterone for about 3 more months. And I was waiting for myself to start passing as male, because I thought that when I started passing as male, even though the surgery had been so brutal, it would all be worth it because I would feel like I had finally become my true self. But I was feeling a lot of doubt at that point because of how horrible the surgery had been. Like I felt completely mutilated. I kept having the suspicion that I had really, really maybe ruined my life, but I kept pushing it down because I was like, I trust that I'm on the right path. Like this has to be the right path. Like it has to be. It was like, I was like desperately telling myself that it was the right thing to do. Just like repeating it to myself, being like, oh man, this is right. It's like, this is the sacrifice. It sometimes you have to make a big sacrifice to become who you really are. But then I finally started passing as male, like strangers started seeing me as male, and it just was meaningless to me because it was just strangers thinking that I was a man, but I knew that I wasn't. I knew that I wasn't in any, I don't know, like everyone who loved me knew my past and knew who I was. And I knew my past. And it didn't feel real that people thought I was male. It felt like I was just hiding. It felt nothing like I expected. And that was kind of the last hope that I had, was that it would become, that I would still sort of become this male version of myself when people started to see me as that. And it just didn't happen. And I had this time when I was like lying awake. I like couldn't sleep. I was like distressed and like just like fretting over everything. And I just had this sort of like, I don't know, almost like word of God in my head, like this like female voice that was just like you have to give up like you're a woman, like there's nothing, this was all for nothing, like there's
Wow.
nothing.
Wow.
And I was like, in my head, I was just sort of was like, okay, like I surrender, like
Wow.
I have to, like this path is not what I thought. I have to get out. Like I have to get out with what I still have.
And what was that like? Like when that landed, like this was all for nothing. How, was that devastating?
I thought my life was completely ruined, but I was like, okay, I've ruined my body. I've embarrassed myself. Everyone made this huge deal about me, and I made a huge deal about myself, and I was wrong, and I was stupid, and also everything that I thought was going to happen didn't happen, and I don't know. I I felt sort of angry at my doctors and therapists for like I sort of felt like a complete fool. I was like, was everyone just fucking with me? Like was everyone laughing at me behind my back? Like now that I see that this was never going to happen and that I would never could truly change, like it was like, oh my God. But I thought, okay, like I'm a mutilated
Ugh.
person now, but I have to get out. Like I have to get out. And it felt like I was like crawling on my hands and knees, just like blood dripping from my body, just like I have to escape. I don't know. It was a low time. I don't know. I thought I had suffered before, but once I got parts of my body amputated, it was like, now I'm really in a hell of my own making. And I didn't understand what I was doing when I did it, not because I didn't understand that they would remove my breasts, because I did, but I didn't understand what that felt like in your body. And I had this like sort of ecstatic dream of becoming this like happy, carefree man. And what I felt like was a maimed woman who had been tricked by herself, I guess. I felt like I don't know. Yeah. It was very humbling.
Yeah. I am curious, in hindsight, Beth, thinking about the nature of your own soul and psyche, how do you conceptualize the part of yourself that tricked you? How do you see that?
The part of myself that convinced myself to undergo the surgery and the hormones and the lifestyle change was probably the part of me that is always like anxiously longing to change and be different and like negate myself, and like reshape myself. And I'm someone who's always gone through a lot of different phases. Like I've gone through a lot of different kinds of like dress styles, and I've had a lot of different obsessions and stuff. I'm always into some new thing. Maybe I'm kind of impressionable or something, but there's just part of me that's always like looking for a new identity, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I hear it as potentially, when you're talking about sort of anxiously wanting to remake yourself, to me, that sounds like it's possibly sort of defensive as a way to deal with discomfort or something, and sort of almost manically seeking an answer.
I'm kind of picking up on the external world part of this. Joseph asked about what went on in your internal world and that process that convinced you to pursue this. But I'm thinking about what goes on in the external world of all of the things we've mentioned: internet, peers, cultural norms, and sources of sort of potential help and guidance. The therapist that after a few sessions wrote a letter and then wrote another letter. And what I'm aware of is that there wasn't a lot of support to really help you explore the difference between what you were searching for which I would say was a kind of wholeness. How do I find the rest of me? How do I find direction? How do I access other parts of myself and separate that from what needed to be concretized physically? If there were real deficits out there for you as a young person, a teenager, college student, young adult.
And, following up on that, and, if you don't want to speak to this, then please let me know. But you said that your parents were affirming when you came out as non-binary, and you mentioned that they took you to your surgery. How did your parents react to any of this? Did they kind of pause to question, for example, the testosterone or the surgery? I'm curious how they reacted to your medical transition, and then actually, I'd be curious how they reacted to your detransition too. If you feel comfortable speaking to that.
Yeah. As far as external factors, including my parents during my gender transition and during my identity exploration, I think I always had kind of like a vertiginous feeling of whoa, everyone around me is they're just gonna let me do this, huh? And I was yeah, they should let me do it, but it felt a little bit scary too. I was wow, I sort of couldn't believe it. I some part of me I think felt like I was playing with fire a little bit, but everyone was like, "We trust you. We trust that you know what's best for yourself." And I was feeling some uncertainty for my inside, but I didn't want to express that, and I wanted everyone to think that I knew what I was doing, so I played along with that a lot. I was sort of, but part of me felt a little strange about it. I was oh, it feels weird that everyone is accepting this at face value, but I really played along. My parents spoke to me briefly. They were like, "Well, that surgery is really serious. It takes a really long time to recover from." And I was like, "Yeah, I understand." They didn't push back very much though, and they took me to the surgery because I think they just wanted me to be happy.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm not sure if they had pushed back, how, I don't know that would have necessarily been a good thing. I just do you know, did they have any feelings about it though?
Once I had the surgery, I showed my chest to my parents, and maybe it's unfair to want this, but I think in retrospect, I do wish that there had been a parental type figure who had stopped me, because it feels I don't know, it just feels like I was sort of out of control. A little while later, I confessed to my parents that I had been wrong and that I shouldn't have done it, and I think they took that pretty hard. It's hard to talk about with them, especially with my mom, because I think they probably feel guilty about it in some ways, even though I know they were just doing what they thought was best. But my dad, I talked with my dad about it once, and he broke down crying, and he hugged me, and he told me that he was sorry that he didn't stop me. It just didn't end up like that, and I just had to find my own way out of the wilderness.
Yeah.
Someone who could have helped you differentiate between what was going on inside emotionally and psychologically and what needed or didn't need to actually manifest in a physical way. And I think Joseph's point earlier really is important here, of that in the dream world and in our imaginations, anything can happen. The image of Dionysus is a great case in point. But what happens is we can confuse the imaginal world with the waking real concrete world. And I think we all do it. I'm thinking about Joseph's stepdaughter who wanted to dress provocatively and so on. Well, parents can kind of intervene there, but ultimately it's just clothing, or it could be just a haircut. But when it gets into hormone treatment and surgery, it is literally and metaphorically very painful. And it's important to disentangle the inner world from outer action.
Yeah, I think it's so true that there's like the urge to transition for me, like it involves some like real changes that I needed to make involving becoming more directed. And I guess I know that you all talk about like the animus that women have, which is like the male energy. And I needed that male agency and like ability to shape my life. I was craving that. But what is so sad is now it's like now I'm at the age where I'm thinking about stuff that is more female, namely like potentially being a mother. And I don't have breasts, so I won't be able to breastfeed. And I actually I don't know if the hormones I took could have affected my fertility. So I'm really worried. I regret that in exploring the male side of myself, I sort of literally cut off the female parts of myself in a way that means I can't. There's some things about like the mother role that I just won't be able to do.
That is a very great loss.
Yeah, it feels overwhelming sometimes. It's like a huge ocean of sadness inside me, like all the time, basically. But it like feels like a physical like void in my chest because the chest area is like dead. Like part of me is dead. Like the nerves are dead.
Mm-hmm.
There's no feeling. It's scarred, and there's like I don't know. It feels like a hole in my body that's like full of like pain. But as time has gone on, it's like I haven't been as sucked down into it, maybe.
In this next stage of your life, I can imagine that you will continue to find new layers of meaning relative to this journey. Many people find themselves on a journey that costs them various things. Fairy tales are full of costs, myths are full of extraordinary costs. And often it is not until we are far down the journey that we can understand what has been purchased, which may be more than simply suffering.
Yeah, there's certainly wisdom that comes with suffering. Beth, I wanted to ask, you talked about kind of clawing your way out. What was the process of detransition like for you?
I don't know. It felt like I was grappling with a new weight of my mistakes that I'd never felt before. And I wasn't it was interesting because it sort of brought me down to earth. I'd been in this sort of like haze of like excitement and transition, but also like having these fantasies of suicide that were sort of these two like emotional poles that I was having. And once I had that ground reality of the surgery, it brought me back into my body in a way that was really horrible, but also I think made me stop indulging the fantasies so much because I was like, okay, like I have to sort of like I really almost died. Like not I didn't literally almost die, but but the pain was so horrible, and part of me really did feel like it was dead, that I was like, I have to stop fucking around. Like, this is deadly serious. So I just stopped, and I just like was like, okay, all I'm gonna do is just like not kill myself, and just like go ahead and like start up some shitty, like horrible little job, just like the humblest possible work. And I just like went to work every day and like was like, okay, like just keep going, like stop indulging suicidal fantasies, stop, this is like, you've really messed your life up. You have to just like, you need to really behave very conservatively and just like go forward a little bit at a time.
Mm-hmm.
That reminds me of something Joseph says a lot, that reality is medicinal. And when you had this big reality land, I'm female, look what I did to myself. It's like, okay, it was like everything cleared.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the euphoria was over, and it was horrible. It was so sad, but I just determined that I couldn't hurt myself like that again. I just had to go forward, and very, very slowly the despair lifted a little tiny bit by a little tiny bit, and I was still carrying it with me every step of the way, but I started to feel these like little bits of like maybe like wisdom or something. Like I felt like an adult, and I felt like grounded, and like I had an understanding of the consequences of my actions in a way that I hadn't before, because it was the first thing I really did outside of the context of school, and it had been such a disaster that I realized that I was really like responsible for my life, and I really had pretty much ruined it right out the gate, so I needed to turn things around for myself.
Yeah, that you had to take your body, your life, your soul, your future seriously, and to let it matter. I think that when we're young and we're in despair, or that we are overly fluid, there's a strange mantra that people will have. It just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. This doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. And that can become incredibly seductive. And now, through this journey, lots of things matter.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of things matter. That you are woven into matter itself. And that the life you're creating, it matters. And part of incarnating into matter is that you carry this desert on your chest, which reminds you of the desert and the area of blightedness that all human beings carry. Yours has been made visible, but that all human beings carry some blighted landscape in them that they have to learn to bear somehow and flourish around that. And sometimes the self, a higher power that we don't even understand, can cause a wellspring, an oasis to bloom in the blighted part of ourselves and bring it back to life in a way that we could never have imagined.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up that sort of everyone has this sort of symbolic desert inside them, because I do think that suffering this way has given me like compassion for like the kinds of profound suffering that other people could be going through, especially because I don't think that my life was touched by like a real tragic suffering type experience before that. It's hard to have it physically on my body, but I know I have a sense of like what kind of things people can survive, like that I can survive, and that other people might have survived, which is a blessing in a way.
It is, and something has rallied in you. Life has rallied in you. In the ancient world, Dionysus was associated with the onset of spring. And when the grass would miraculously appear from the dark soil of the winter, people would call it the Zoe of Dionysus, which is the Greek word for life, and that you are in life and have come back to life in this new configuration through this journey into an underworld. And you have returned and you have your stories of that underworld, which are full of suffering and wisdom.
Beth, are you angry?
Yes. Yeah, I am. Not as much as I used to be. I felt really angry. First, I felt angry, and this doesn't make me sound very good, but I gotta admit it because it's true. I was really angry at the people around me for for a while. I went through a phase where I felt unreasonably, but I felt like everyone had played a joke on me, like everyone had agreed with me on this thing that was clearly crazy, and I felt really angry that I had this sense that everyone had allowed me to do something. Um, which of course it was me who did it. But I was sort of angry at the people around me for a while until I sort of, I think part of like understanding myself as like a person with control over my life and agency was like seeing like people around me they're like fallible in the way that I'm fallible. Like I went down this path that ended up being bad for me, and no one around me could see it either. And at first I was angry at everyone. And then I saw that there's just, people are just taking life as they see it. And then I became more angry at maybe at myself for a while. And but then I don't know, I just realized I started to have a sense of like the like frailty and limitedness of our understanding of ourselves and our circumstances, and how much we can sort of be in the thrall of emotions at different times. And like, I don't know, it's just really easy to kind of be astray and not really realize it for a while. I do feel angry I think at my doctors and therapists, because I think potentially they didn't do their job a little bit. I do still feel like maybe they missed some steps, but I don't know. Even doctors and therapists can be drawn into the seductive idea of a magical transformation
and being helpers and saviors.
Yeah. This is really very moving, Beth, and thank you for sharing your story of how hard the process of discernment really, really is, including for doctors and therapists. Really understand what the realities are versus what we want to think, what we believe, what's politically correct, what's liberal, whatever all the words are. It's a difficult process. And I'm very appreciative of what can happen when someone, in this case you, goes through a process like this, of what a radical and rapid maturation process it can be.
Yes, absolutely. I'm also really appreciating this, and there's not really an answer for it. It's just sort of a dilemma of being human, is how we can be so sure of something. We can really feel sure of something. We can ask ourselves, where is it coming from? Where is it welling up? And we can feel certain that we found the answer. And when we go down that path, it can feel really good. And then it turns out it wasn't so good. I mean, I know that that's happened to me. It could still happen to me tomorrow. But something that I think is a very, very good idea turns out to not be good. It's just a hard part about being human. There's no way to know. There's just no way to really know for sure. Is there?
Yeah. Definitely. I think a good lesson that I have to take away from it is just appreciating that things are ambiguous and you can be pulled in a direction and you can have like a powerful feeling, but it's better and it's good to explore those feelings and what they say about you.
Absolutely.
But I think it's bad because your like feelings and your emotional landscape is so fluid and always evolving. But I think you also want to avoid like maiming yourself, I guess.
Well, you do bring up a good point. It's important to take feelings really seriously, but not necessarily to take them literally.
Yeah.
Jung said something like that at one point.
Mm-hmm.
Beth, before we transition into a dream, I'd like to ask you if there was anything that you felt that any of us had said that might have felt insensitive or inadequately informed, or perhaps it made you uncomfortable, and to give you some space here to educate any of us here, because all of us, even as analysts, are sometimes clumsy or stumbling through really complicated experiences that we ourselves have not had.
That's a good question, and I think it's helpful. It's helpful to think about a lot of my like journey of like self conception through these different archetypes. Especially like that there is like a tradition of like Dionysian androgyny and like not just androgyny but like shifting male to female type expression. I guess maybe I want to like emphasize that like what it actually felt like once surgery and hormones had like happened and stuff, it like didn't really feel Dionysian anymore. It was like it felt like I don't know what the right archetype would be, but it really was like something much darker.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in the field of trauma, actually. I mean, I think the way you described it, we could see your mastectomy as kind of a medical trauma, and for me, that brings up a different archetypal story. There's a story about, I think it's pronounced Cainus, who was abducted and raped by Poseidon. And Poseidon had such a good time that he offered to grant her a wish. And she was deeply distraught at having been violated and asked that she be transformed into a man so that she would never be wronged again. And it seems like with your early experience of, kind of sexual exploitation to which you willingly submitted, that may be part of your story too, that this was a way to try to handle something that was really difficult, and it became an escape.
Yeah, it's interesting because it is sort of a deeply self-destructive thing that I embarked upon, but so it's like some of the urges feel like they were healthy, and some of them feel like they were self annihilating, and they were all mixed together in my experience. So it was just really complicated.
Definitely very complicated.
And it sounds like you had wished maybe someone had heard that. There was a mix of really positive, life-affirming impulses and annihilating impulses, both of which are legitimate parts of being human. And perhaps someone might have helped you figure out a whole selection of ways you might have explored that, rather than just one particular track that you found yourself in.
I would like it if someone could hear my story and see the complexity of these kinds of feelings. Because I think at the time I was so driven and so obsessed that I'm not sure I could have heard it from someone that I didn't feel like really understood. But I I know I had a therapist a little later when I was doing some like trauma therapy, who told me that she had another client who was questioning her gender, and she told the client about my story, and she said that I had discovered it wasn't so much that I felt wrong in a female body, I just was experiencing feeling wrong in my body altogether. So transition didn't do it for me, and I think that the client was like, oh, that makes sense, and like was like, okay, I think that makes sense for me too. So it's good to hear. I would love it if other people didn't have to suffer quite as much as I did.
Would you say that that is the primary message you're hoping that people might hear from you? Or is there more of a message that you'd like people to hear from you?
I don't know. I mean, even saying that, I feel a little shy because I don't want to prescribe someone else my path and say that, oh, this is going to happen to you if you do this. Like, I don't really know what other people are going through.
And in some sense, this is just your story, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is just your story in all of its complexity.
Mm-hmm.
But it is complex, and all kinds of stories are complex. And maybe the takeaway here is to understand the complexity and engage the complexity of all kinds of important life choices, decisions, beliefs, etc. Especially when someone is going to embark on a course of action that has an irrevocability to it.
Mm-hmm. Some things are permanent in a really profound way. Mm-hmm. I didn't understand as a young person, but I understand now.
Mm-hmm. Beth, is there anything else that you wish we had said or wish we had said differently that comes to mind?
No, I think I really appreciated everything that we talked about. I think this was really an interesting way to reflect on my experiences. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Would you mind reading the dream for us?
How long ago did you have the dream, Beth?
So this was sort of, I think, in the beginning of the time after I had stopped taking hormones. Mm-hmm. So pretty early on. So quite a few years ago now, but so this is a dream I had when I was first sort of off hormones and feeling really at my lowest. Okay, so I'll read this. I had a dream that I met a woman in a lush forest. The forest was filled with strange relics, an abandoned child's playground, a little home, and abandoned campsites. I knew she was a detransitioner, but unlike me, she was proud, unabashed, and free. She told me I could be free like her once no one knew where to find me. And then she ran off into the jungle, and I could just see like the leaves rustling, and she was like running with incredible strength. I couldn't see her anymore. And I had this feeling of freedom and hope.
Oh, wow. What a beautiful dream. And you said that you were at a really low point when you started this, when you had this dream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was, I think it was potentially when I was sort of in the crawling on my hands and knees, psychologically phase of my life.
So a couple things about that. First of all, we see the compensatory nature of dreams, that this was compensating your conscious perspective, which was so low. And here is this dream kind of offering a very different view on things. And also there is a way that sometimes when we're at a really low ebb, the psyche will produce an image of what could be. It's kind of like in the Grail legend. The quest begins with a vision of the Grail so that you kind of know what you're looking for. And it might be years before you find it, but it gives you energy for the journey to have that vision.
Yeah, it did feel like it felt like an image of maybe a future me if I could be strong enough.
Mm-hmm. And one of the really wonderful things about Jungian theory is that Jung was as interested and even more interested in where a person's life path was going, because psyche is going somewhere toward wholeness and a sense of integrity and completion. And I think this dream points toward that. With the image of this woman who is strong and free and unabashed. And I also appreciate the image of her physicality, of her ability to run and be healthy. And I think it points toward, it gives you an image of the wholeness that can be the path that you really are on.
Yeah, it was almost like a Amazonian like wild woman or something. She was what I took away from it was she was like not worried about what other people thought of her at all, which had been such a preoccupation for me when I was like exploring being really sexual in a feminine way. And then when I was presenting as male, I was always so preoccupied with people's perception of me. But this was this woman who she was just like running in the forest. I couldn't even see her. And she was like,
yeah. Well, she's a shadow figure that seems to embody what Jung called golden shadow or bright shadow. Same-sex figures are often real other sort of parts of ourselves. And here she is, knowing who she is with a sense of her own self and her own power.
And I like that phrase, when others won't know where to find you, because in some sense that's like where we are when people can't pin us down and kind of pin a label on us, and people don't know where to find us. It's like that's when we're beyond worrying about what other people think of us.
Yeah, it was she had a real feeling of like defiance and rebellion, and like she was like had this real like zestiness and enjoyment, as opposed to the kind of like masochistic, belabored stuff I had been working on and like feeling bad for myself and hating myself and stuff. But she had that almost like that like masculine energy, but like in a woman, which felt like just what I hoped, I guess.
One of the things that the dream evokes for me is the eternal and irresistible spirit of nature itself, the anima mundi, that the jungle, representing the fertile part of the unconscious, the matrix out of which all possibilities emerge, is pure and undefiled, no matter what has been done to us or what we have done. In ancient Kabbalah, they call it the neshama, which is the recording part of the soul that acknowledges what has happened, and thus there is the abandoned relics of other lives. But she herself is unmarred and unmarked, and she is part of the hidden matrix of all life and of your own soul, and that she is with you and part of you, and that you too are pure and undefiled, despite all of the challenges and insults that a life brings to us.
It was a real gift, that dream.
It was.
How are you feeling here at the end?
It's so interesting to hear about the, I guess, the Jungian idea of like a golden shadow and like a matrix of nature. I'm not so familiar with either of those things, but it feels like a very, I don't know, it almost feels like a whole new like intoxicating mystery in a way, which is kind of funny since that seems to be my whole problem. But in this case, it's like I think the value is no longer one of like self-mutilation, but instead like it's different. I don't know.
Beth, I think what you've been searching for all along is transcendence.
Mm.
And that's what hooks you, is you're searching for something bigger, deeper. You're searching for meaning and that which is transcendent. And it's true that Jungian thought does offer that. It offers a way of viewing the world that really prioritizes transcendent experiences and a transcendent way of looking at being human.
Part of the healing process in that model is to become acquainted with the world of the gods and goddesses and the world of human relationships. And by the gods and goddesses, we mean these powerful, unconscious forces that we can know something about. And we often go to antiquity and anthropology and myths and dreams to get glimpses of them and to understand that at that level, what you have experienced is also universal as well as personal. And that gives us some relief.
It does. It feels realistic to like think about the archetypes, like the way that they can grip you and the way your unconscious kind of expresses itself, and to realize that both that like I will always sort of probably be involved in some sort of, I don't know, in every phase of your life, it seems like there's some sort of archetypical journey or transformation you're going on, but also to maybe have the wisdom to temper that Dionysian madness with a little bit of grown up caution.
Absolutely, that's it. You've named it. That's absolutely right. That's brilliant.
Well, thank you so much. We so appreciate your coming on the podcast.
Well, this was a real pleasure. Thank you so much for your generosity in having me on.
We shared our interview with musician Wells Hanley, who crafts songs for people whose lives and stories inspire him. Through his intuitive process, informed by Jungian insights, his songs help people feel seen, heard, and understood. He wrote this song for Beth.
You were my lost lover. I tried for so long just to find you here beside me. I was so wrong. I wandered darkened highways. I turned every stone far beyond the point of breaking, but I was never alone.
We dedicate this episode to all who seek wholeness, who long for union with the invisible other, who ache to make manifest great secrets hidden in their hearts, who are carried by hope to faraway lands and return with wisdom woven in their scars. We honor you as soul teachers and welcome your voices.